Welcome to Breaking Down Patriarchy. I'm Amy McPhie Allebest. If you are listening to this episode on the day of its release, then it's the day after the 2025 presidential inauguration. Donald Trump has just been sworn in as the 47th president of the United States. And as we enter into this second term of divisive leadership, many of us are apprehensive of what lies ahead. After all, it was the last Trump presidency under which we saw more and more white supremacists and aspiring fascists marching brazenly through the streets. Many of us might have been surprised to see open racism and misogyny, which seemed to be creeping out of the woodwork, and our entire country was rattled by the worst of these occurrences, like the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville and the insurrection at our nation's capital on January 6, 2021. These events and other acts of alt-right terrorism have left permanent scars on our national identity and will likely have consequences spanning far beyond what we can presently see. And so, with that in mind, I am so grateful to be joined today by a woman who's been studying the alt-right, white supremacists, and other extremist movements longer than most of us have even been aware of them. She was a boots-on-the-ground journalist in Charlottesville as well as on January 6th, and she is the author of the book Black Pill: How I Witnessed the Darkest Corners of the Internet Come to Life, Poison Society, and Capture American Politics. Please join me in welcoming to the podcast, Elle Reeve. Welcome, Ellie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really, really interested in the work that you're doing and so excited to talk about it with you today. First, I'll introduce listeners to you through just a quick professional bio, and then I'll ask you to introduce yourself more personally after that. Elle Reeve is a CNN correspondent whose work has won numerous awards, including the Emmy, the Peabody, and more. Her writing has appeared in Vice, The New Republic, New York Magazine, Elle, The Atlantic, and The Daily Beast. She lives in New York. So that is a very, very brief bio. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about who you are, kind of what brought you to the work that you do today, and a little bit about what makes you you.
Oh, sure. Actually, I have an easy answer for that. I was born in downtown Atlanta, in the 80s when at a time when there's this panic around the inner city.
Hmm.
Um, so most of my neighbors were Black and most of my classmates were Black. And we grew up studying the civil rights movement as sort of the pinnacle of American history. Like that's the history classes would sort of peak there. Then when I was 13, I moved to a very white town in small town Tennessee. And it was very evangelical, very conservative. It's the 90s. Rush Limbaugh is really a big, powerful cultural, it's not just political, but a cultural movement. And I just, and history classes would peak with the Civil War.
Oh.
Um, yeah, and I mean that's just something I noticed like as an eighth grader, a ninth grader, just the differences in the narrative of American history. I saw two very different sides of the South, and that was really been important to how I see the world now.
Hmm. That's really fascinating. Just side by side, your actual history curriculum. That's,
Yeah,
and that's like informing how young Americans are going to become like, it will inform their civic engagement and how they relate to each other, like for the rest of their lives.
yeah.
That's,
I mean, history classes as just one example. Of course, there were these vast differences in the way people talked about political and cultural issues. Um, but yeah, I mean, I just saw it gave me an ability to be a little bit outside of my own experience. I didn't grow up around families that were exactly like mine. It was, there are a lot of immigrants in our neighborhood as well.
hmm,
And it just gave me a really interesting perspective.
hmm. Yeah, that's really fascinating. How did you become a journalist? How and why?
It's kind of a long story. What's the short version? My family, we had to move to Missouri for healthcare. Is the short story. And the University of Missouri had a very good journalism program. So I was like, well, I'll try that. I was kind of interested in politics, but once I saw politics close up, I didn't want to be on that side of it. And George W. Bush had been reelected as president, and there's this kind of like today, this big cultural conversation on what did the elite miss on the coast. And at
Mm.
that time, it was values voters instead of Trump supporters. That was the big buzzword. And I was like, hire me. I will explain middle America to you. Like I'm your girl. And that's how I got my first job.
Wow. Oh, that's so interesting. Amazing. Okay, well, let's kind of skip forward to the now and talk about your book. But before we dive into the book itself, I'd love you to get just define some terms. So first of all, let's talk about your book is titled Black Pill. What does that mean when you refer to that in the book?
Sure. The short answer is it's a dark and gleeful nihilism that the world is going to burn and you're going to enjoy watching
Hmm.
that. Longer version is that it's a spinoff from a term from the Matrix, the red pill, which I'm sure most people are familiar with now. It generally means taking right or very far right views on. It's important to remember that in the Matrix, the blue pill is where you go back to the illusions, and the red pill is where you go back to the harsh reality. And so it it symbolizes not taking on a new set of ideas, but that you've been stripped away of your illusions and your ideology, and you're just seeing the truth.
Hmm.
From that came pilled became a very popular, like you could be crypto pilled or Russia pilled or whatever. You hear it on the left now too. Like this 4chan, message board culture has spread across the country. It's just infected everything. But the black pill, I think, is the most relevant because it's a way that people give themselves permission to make moral and ethical decisions they wouldn't have otherwise.
Hmm.
Because why why adhere to the morality of a corrupt and bankrupt society? Like you shouldn't. You're above that. You don't have to play by those rules.
Hmm. Got it. Okay. A couple of key groups that come out or come up a lot throughout the book are incels and the alt-right. And I
Yeah.
think probably most listeners have at least like some familiarity with those terms, but I'd actually love you to dig in and kind of give us a more fleshed out, maybe crash course on who those groups are, what they believe, and how they relate to each other.
So incel stands for involuntary celibate, involuntarily celibate. It started in the 90s, but it really got going in the early 2010s. It's mostly young men who are politicized virgins. They believe that because of feminism, they are they are doomed to never have sex because they're ugly or they're awkward or maybe they're autistic. Or there's even men of color in those groups. So they think being Asian or Indian means they won't be able to get the girls that they want. Um, it is filled with all this slang that is absurd and easy to laugh at. And it's important to understand that they know that. Like they view themselves as pathetic, losers, lowly. Like there's a real self-awareness in this culture. But you do have to take it seriously because it has produced several mass murderers. The alt-right is a sort of section of white nationalism that existed from, let's say, 2008 till about 2019. It really got going when Trump started running for office in 2015. So obviously, racism has been around a long time. What separates the alt-right from that is that it was not geographically based. So there's not going to like local clan meetups or citizens councils. It was internet based. It's younger. It's mostly atheistic at that time, and heavily influenced by the incels, extremely misogynist to the point where old school neo Nazis were really put off by it.
Wow, I didn't realize that. Yeah, interesting. Okay, and both of these groups, incels and alt-right, I do picture there being like a lot of overlap in like who's involved in these movements. And it seems like a lot of the discourse happens on online forums. You just mentioned that like 8chan. And I'm wondering though, because to write this book, you met with these people like as not with their like online persona in front, but like actually as human beings. And so I'm wondering from your experience firsthand, do these men act with as much misogyny in real life as they do online? And sorry. And do you get the sense that they really practice and believe what they preach, or is it kind of like kind of a macho persona that they project?
Well, a line I heard over and over in different contexts was it started as a joke and then became real. For example, two white nationalists who were very heavily involved in Charlottesville, they were their internal communications were made public as part of a trial over their actions in Charlottesville, and they're objecting to the close reading of their jokes, their racist jokes, their glibness about violence, and all that. And they're telling me, "Oh, we're just doing that to troll the media. We're just doing that to get your attention, to make people, like think we're crazy and then we'll draw more people to their movement." And I'm like, but you were saying this to each other in a private chat room for what? Like you thought in 5 years I'd be sitting here asking you about it being on trial? Like if you're doing the bit alone and in the shower, like it's not a bit anymore. And so like mostly I met people along different parts of the path in that process of that those ideas hardening and it becoming more and more of their personality. Fred Brennan, who created 8chan and later tried to destroy it, the way he put it was you can sort of anonymously try on these ideas if you're curious and see if they fit, and then you practice it over time, and eventually, you become this thing that you were just joking about. Some of them would be polite to me in person. Um, some would be trying to be polite and still say really bizarre misogynist things. An incel I interviewed in person in particular. And then I definitely had people just scream racial slurs at me.
Racial slurs at you. You're white
Yeah,
for people who can't see, right? Yeah,
yes,
that's interesting.
but right, I'm white.
Mhm.
But they, but they knew I would be offended. All right, they
Mm,
hate very,
okay.
very, and they see the media as liberal media. They see me as a tool of all that opposes them, and they hate women. So
Hmm.
they know that that would offend me to hear the N word,
Okay.
even though I'm not black.
And they would be
So,
right that it would affect, right?
I
It's
mean,
just,
this was very early on. I mean, this is a thing that actually happened to me on a phone call, and I was shocked. I
mhm.
had never heard it's a white man screaming the N word at the top of his lungs over and over and over to me, and I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
I just didn't say anything because I was like, I've never because it's not just that he's saying this thing to offend me; he's debasing himself so much in order to get to me, and
Hmm.
that is also kind of horrific to observe.
Yeah. So who are these people, Ellie? Like, what is the process? Because you said that kind of they're at different points in the process and they can try on these personas and then sometimes it hardens and calcifies and becomes who they really are. Why would a person even be attracted to try on some of those ideas in the
Yeah,
first place?
yeah. I mean, they can come from all different places, but there are common themes. Usually it's younger men who think of themselves as smart and funny, but have some struggles socially. A lot of them identify with autism. Now, two important ones that I have interviewed actually were diagnosed with Asperger's in the 90s. So in some cases, this is genuine. But in others, it's a self diagnosis or just an affinity. And a really big piece of slang in this world is autist, AUTIST, as in someone who seems to have the characteristics of autism.
Hmm.
And you can use it as a term of derision, like when someone is acting ridiculously and you want to put them down as sort of not in control of their emotions. Or it can be a term of endearment, like during Pizzagate, there was a Reddit post called like "This is weaponized autism." Now,
Hmm.
of course, again, I know many people would find that offensive. They know that, and that's what they like about it.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, and then I'm curious also about the ideology itself. And like, let's say there is a young man who does feel maybe alone and alienated and like, okay, I'm seeing other guys get the girls. That's something
Mhm.
I want. I'm feeling left out. And then they find a group online and they're trying on these ideas. Who are the originators of these ideologies who've established the kind of the narrative that these people would find? Because like it seems like these young people are kind of like vulnerable maybe in some ways and kind of like being indoctrinated by these bigger ideas, these more powerful entities. Who are those power players that started this?
That's really interesting. It's kind of a complex question. So 4chan on these message boards, it's completely anonymous. And that is the draw because the person's position in society cannot be used against them to argue that their ideas are not credible, right?
Mm,
So, and we do use it like white nationalists are very aware of. There were many documentaries in the '90s about Klans members or whatever who the cliche is a trailer park in Alabama, right? They very much didn't want to be portrayed that way, and they're self-conscious about being portrayed as trash. They said this to me on the record.
mm,
So, like, this is a world where it doesn't matter who you are, and you can be a different person every day because it's so completely anonymous.
mm,
Um, More broadly, there's long been a kind of intellectual wing of racism. I mean, people who uh, have done scientific research, purporting to show that white people are smarter than everyone else or white people are more uh, altruistic, have testified before Congress, like in the 70s. And that was funded by the Pioneer Fund, which is a racist anti immigrant group. Like, so there's a long, like, sort of infrastructure, like intellectual infrastructure for scientific racism.
mm,
And so what you'll see on 4chan is these kids will make collages of different charts purporting to show that, say, Black people commit crime at a higher rate, or, like they'll show maps of genes. And like, if you're not, a specialist in that area, it doesn't really make sense. But what it shows is like Black people being here and white people being over here and how they're like not actually connected. Like they're not genetically closely related, which isn't true.
no, of course, yeah. But they're
There's
finding
more
these out. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, there's more genetic diversity in between like two tribes of orangutans who live on opposite sides of a river in Cameroon than there is in the entire human race. Like
Hmm.
we're just not that different from each other.
Hmm.
So they will find these old-fashioned sort of tweety racists. I mean, they have conferences, they have book publishing companies, and they'll put these maps together, and those will go viral. And you see them pop up again and again. For example, a collage I had seen before was in the manifesto of the Buffalo shooter. Um, so that's one place, but it's also kind of self-generating. I mean, the message boards are um like a market testing ground, and they see what ideas bubble up to the top. The first person who ever texted me a picture of drag queen story hour was a teenage fascist troll in 2017, like
Whoa.
long before it became a big part of the national discourse.
And he just made it up to see if
Yeah.
it would get a lot of traction or if it would be
It was an
inflammatory.
image that was going viral in that world. They're
Okay.
very fixated on trans people.
Uh-huh. Wow. And they just love, it seems like, I mean, this whole concept of like watch the world burn and what I'm hearing a lot from what you're saying is just, well, I guess I'm trying to get a sense of how much is like real conviction inside, like this is what they really believe versus just wanting to be controversial, wanting to like pick a fight with the quote unquote liberals for the reaction of it. I mean, I guess it's kind of hard to know like what people are actually feeling inside, but
Well, it starts one way and it ends up the other way.
mhm.
In 2016, I actually brought this question to Richard Spencer in 2016, like right after Trump was elected.
Mm.
I thought this like really diminished his movement that the vast majority of his followers were these teenage trolls who were just trying to get a rise out of people online, and posted so much racist stuff they started believing it. And he was like, yeah, there have been lots of guys who've come up to me and said, hey, I just started researching anti-Semitism or racism or whatever in order to offend people better, but then I red pilled myself and now I believe it.
Oh, I see.
And like, I think a really important takeaway, like generally in all of politics in this digital age, is like just because it's stupid doesn't mean it's not powerful.
Hmm.
Like I even had conversations with people who helped organize Charlottesville. Who were like, well, the James Alex Fields, he's the man who drove his car into a crowd and murdered a woman. Did he really believe it? Was he really one of us? He didn't really get all the ideas. And I'm like, he drove halfway across the country all night. He wore the polo shirt, he wore the shield, he drove it like he believed it enough.
Yeah.
How much more does he need to truly believe it?
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the next question I wanted to ask because I know you were present in Charlottesville during the Unite the Right rally. And I know you've spoken about those experiences both in the book and in other interviews, but I don't want to ask you to relive it if you don't want to, because I know it must have been really traumatizing. But I'm wondering what experience and maybe some knowledge and takeaways that you've taken with you from that event and what you wouldn't mind sharing with us.
Um, so the first night, so Charlottesville kind of happened over 3 days. The first night was a Friday night. I knew that there was going to be some kind of event, but I didn't know what it would be. And we figured out it was going to be at this one field on the UVA campus. So we park over and we're kind of like staking it out, and we see these vans like unloading a bunch of guys in polos, like over and over and over. And it's like, oh, this is actually organized. So we go out across the field, we get kind of like up on a road above it so we can look out, and they're lining people up and handing out tiki torches and stuff. And then they all light the torches at the same time. And that's when, boom, you can see that it's a crowd of hundreds of people snaking through the yard. And that's when I like really realized the risk that this was really big, that had drawn real numbers of people who were willing to show their faces, like not a Klan rally. No one was wearing hoods, you know? Um, that was a real moment for me. So they started marching through Charlottesville or the UVA campus, and they went the wrong way. They had intended to march to a Thomas Jefferson statue that was only 5 minutes away, but they totally got lost.
Mm.
And so they're winding all the way through, and they're just amping themselves up along the way. And this is when I sort of came to start understanding mob mentality, because you really can feel like the human emotion, like conducting through the crowd, like it's electric. It really is electric. And they're like howling like animals. And they had planned to say, "You will not replace us," which that was like sort of their PR version of like portraying themselves as sober young men just standing up for the existence of white people. Like, why should it's okay to be white was another one of their slogans. Like, why should white people be erased off the face of the earth? Like, we just want to keep existing. That's the idea they wanted to promote. But they got too hyped up and they said, Jews will not replace us, alluding to their conspiracy theory, the Great Replacement, that
Mhm.
that Jews are intentionally importing people of color in order to dilute the white race. And then it ended at the Thomas Jefferson statue, where there were a couple, like maybe 2 dozen at the most, college kids standing around it, just sort of like saying, "No, this doesn't represent us." And it was a total melee. These guys encircled them and just like beat them up, and it was crazy. I mean, we lost our camera guys for a moment in the crowd. I mean, they were fine, but um, it
You,
was just so insane. And then it like dispersed.
oh my gosh. And you
And
watched this happen. You were there watching people getting
oh yeah,
beaten up and yelling these racist
yeah, like with the
epithets. Oh my
torches, like they're
gosh.
using it. Yeah, it was crazy. It was a total like dog pile. It was so insane. I climbed on. There was like a sort of chest high, maybe like mini column. I climbed on top of that just to try to see in the crowd to see our guys, and I couldn't find them because there was too many people fighting each other. And then it dissipates, and a white nationalist I had interviewed earlier that day, Chris Cantwell, is there, like almost crying because he's been maced, and like how terrible it is that he's been maced. And he really felt like the victim. And in my subsequent conversations with him, he would come back to that over and over, how he had been so horribly attacked and maced.
Mm.
And I'm like, but you encircled those people, you outnumber them 10-1. He corrects me. He's like, no, probably like 20-1. And I'm like, you still feel like the victim? He's like, yes, we
Wow.
were the ones who were attacked.
Who maced him? Who did they claim was attacking them?
They claimed Antifa.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if they know for sure. I mean, the cameraman I was working with also got maced a little bit, but they kept doing their job.
Wow. So it's still not known? Like in the melee, you're saying like so many people around and just kind of chaos. They
But
don't know
he was
exactly.
photographed macing someone.
Okay.
That later led to his arrest.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow. So yes, that's not I'm just for listeners who can't see me, I'm like have my hands over my face. I just can't imagine what that actually would have felt like to be in the presence, like you said, and there, well, I mean, a Klan rally would have been its own horror as well, seeing the hoods, but to see people so brazen
Mhm.
and to be saying those things out loud, and that's I think what was is so terrifying about this movement and the alt-right getting more power is just like we said in the intro, just people coming out of the woodwork and realizing how many people actually may have been harboring these horrible racist and misogynist views the whole time, and now they're just not scared to say them in public anymore and to take action. It's just absolutely terrifying. But you've talked about how Charlottesville was mostly a group of white men, but then you
Mhm.
describe how the people storming the Capitol on January 6th were more diverse, a more diverse gathering of people, including significantly more women. So that's really interesting. And maybe we can shift our attention to that day because you were there too.
Mhm.
I understand. So, is there anything that you'd like our listeners to know about what happened that day? And why there were more women present on the 6th.
Yeah, I think because you so QAnon was the animating idea for a lot of people there. For a group of about 60 people I was following as they organized and planned to go to the rally. And as far as I know, none of them entered the Capitol. But in QAnon, there is a nefarious cabal that's manipulating the world to do bad things, but it is Democrats and liberals and Hollywood, and they are hurting children for their
Hmm.
own enjoyment. That is a much more palatable idea than like Jews are trying to hurt the white race.
Hmm.
Like most Americans are not cool with Nazis. Like in the American mythology, we beat Nazis. Like we are
Hmm.
not, these Nazis are weird creeps, losers.
Yeah, they're the bad guys.
They're the bad guys, and it's always going to be that way. And so the the QAnon had a much larger potential audience.
Hmm.
Um, who doesn't want to protect children?
Yeah.
It also wasn't explicitly racist. It was not explicitly misogynist. I met a Black woman there who said she was stopping socialism. I met immigrants there. Many more people also were motivated by the shutdowns during COVID. I mean, people were very, very, very angry about that. And they were angry about the George Floyd protests, that those protests were allowed in their terms to happen, whereas they weren't allowed to have their small business. And
Hmm.
of course, there were some contradictions in what could remain open and what was closed. But those things combine to have just a really intense bottled up rage. And the other thing that brought these that I see in common with these two things is that it was a big online community where you feel like you're talking to your best friends in the world, even though you've never met them. That was all building towards one event, like one day in real life, where you'd get to meet those people in person and you'd all
Hmm.
get to like do the thing you believed in.
Hmm.
And that's what I think violence spilled over on both those days.
Hmm. Very interesting. Okay, so you're saying like with these, there's a lot more of a broad appeal, and that's why you're saying there were more women there because it wasn't specifically like narrowly focused on race and gender. It was a host of issues that were grievances for a lot of different people.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
they were women who were spokespeople for QAnon.
Yeah.
Crunchy moms. We've heard a lot
Yeah.
about that in the last election, but
Yep.
there was a significant crunchy mom presence.
Mm-hmm. So I was mad about vaccines probably and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, digging more into this gender question, I guess in general, aside from January 6th, are there women in the alt-right in general? I think of it as being because it does have such a strain of misogyny. I think of it being way more masculine and much more dominated by men. But I'm sure there are women in the alt-right movement. So if so, who are they and what holds them there?
Yes, there were a small number of women there who were very dedicated. They, most of them in conversations with me, I talked to several who left. Um, it's funny, like if I was at an alt-right event, sometimes it would be like the one woman there who'd say the most misogynist thing to
Mhm.
me. And I'd wonder like who are like why are you like that? So later the women I talked to, many of them had some kind of trauma in their past. And they came in through YouTube often with videos of like a Richard Spencer or people like him giving a kind of professorial talk. They didn't come in with the slurs. They liked the idea of strong traditional families. Um, some of them were looking for stability. Um, they like the outside, like the pitch is that women's feminine virtues are going to be elevated and respected, that this woman, you can care for the home, and that won't be seen as like silly or superficial or not serious, right? That like the girly stuff will be taken serious and you'll have a man protector. But in real life, that's not what happened. In real life, the joke was made real. Many of these women were treated very poorly. Multiple have said in court documents that they were physically or emotionally abused.
Mm.
Um, there was this concept of white Sharia, is their idea of Sharia law, that because women vote for more liberal candidates, that because they believe in social equality, the only way to make America what they wanted it to be was to prevent women from voting, holding credit cards, holding jobs. They wanted to lower the age of consent, all of that. And it was just a joke. Like other people in the alt right thought it was just a joke until a woman started showing up wearing a burqa to these parties. And they would pass out like these cards that said white Sharia and all of that. And, publicly, these women would present as though they were having a great time. But privately, they'd be complaining to each other of their horrible mistreatment, about how these men were dangerous and not to be trusted, how the movement hated women.
Mm.
The one who was wearing the burqa often talked about feeling debased, dehumanized, that she would never respect herself again. Do not trust these men.
Mm.
But then the next day she'd be right back out there posting about white Sharia.
Wow. I mean, I guess it surprises me a little, but then as I reflect on the very conservative patriarchal religious tradition that I come from, and having heard, women I love, women I'm close to defend patriarchy, and
Yep.
sometimes it does come from women who felt like they weren't taken care of or maybe were abused as children. And so what they then kind of hang their hopes on is like, a man might, maybe my dad or something, didn't take care of me as a child. So I want a man who will take care of me. And they kind of want to align themselves with that power to feel protected
Yeah.
instead of realizing like there's another choice, which is like a man who takes you seriously as his equal, right? Like it's not just those two options, like a man who doesn't take care of you or a man who does, because that's like the default is the man is going to be the protector and the leader. And they don't realize there are more options than that. But I kind of can have compassion for them for that. Like if you do feel like you have been abused or you've been neglected and you feel weak, aligning yourself with power kind of makes sense, right? Like you can see from their point of view why they may do that and then why they may double down on like, no, this is what I want, even while they're privately in pain about it. I know versions of these women is what I'm saying, and it's so frustrating, but seeing why they might be vulnerable and susceptible to that kind of indoctrination and internalized misogyny, but it breaks my heart.
No, that's very true. I mean, you just see it over and over again.
Hmm.
One woman who she liked to troll incel forums, she told me that um, one, she would depersonalize and not think of herself as a woman. So when they would say terrible comments, it wasn't about her.
Hmm.
But also, she told me that she had been abused. And so she really was drawn to the incel idea of ugliness and said she had this feeling like if she had been ugly, then maybe she wouldn't have been abused.
Oh, geez.
And she talked about understanding eventually that these spaces reward cruelty,
Hmm.
um, and that the men were mimicking men they'd seen dominate women. You know, they were just trying to replicate that. They wanted to be that, alpha male.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what better way to just display that to the other men than by dominating a woman?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that leads us to the next question, which was what are the factors that make boys and men susceptible to this? And you write about in all these alt-right factions that these are men who have, they share feelings of frustration, being ostracized, and having their lives ruined for various reasons. But it's interesting that from your writing, it also seems that they're angry and specifically angry with their fathers and other men. Like they're angry at women and they're angry at at people of color or whatever, but they're also mad and at their fathers and the white supremacist Matthew Heimbach said, long story short, why do we become fascists? Because F our dads. That was
Yeah.
really interesting to me. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, Matt Heimbach, he was kind of a rising star in white nationalism in 2013. As a 19-year-old, he started a white students union at his college. He grew up in a relatively affluent suburb in Maryland, and he felt that his dad didn't pay any attention to the family because he was always seeking these external rewards, um, you know, uh, for his work. Um, he worked in public schools, and that he felt like his dad didn't have any of these traditional masculine skills, like that his father couldn't teach him how to train a dog or to fish, or and so he hated what his dad represented, which he felt like the destruction of the family. Um, while pursuing, sort of capitalist success, and ultimately like empty and hollow existence in the suburbia. A lot of these guys, like one of the incels I talked to, had a distant dad, and then his mom sort of took care of him, paid for his studio apartment, like paid his rent, and he resented her for it.
Mm. Wow. Just all these people. Maybe we should just invest in therapy for these people because honestly,
Yeah.
like there's just there's so much pain. Like there's so much pain that is not resolved, and then it just gets warped and twisted into these incredibly dangerous and harmful behaviors externally. But it's just like, oh, these people just need inner healing, to be honest, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, yes, that doesn't diminish their responsibility for what they've done, but
Yeah.
yes, Matt Parrott, who was sort of Matt Heimbach's partner in crime and racism,
Hmm.
he grew up without a lot of money, very bad physically, like very not gifted athletically. He
Hmm.
described a humiliating moment after playing 2 years of Little League that he actually hit the ball and he didn't even get on base. He was still out at first base. But because he actually hit the ball, everyone cheered so much and they signed the ball and gave it to him. And like he
Hmm.
hated it. But
Oh.
he did have this one thing, which was he was scored as very, very smart. He
Hmm.
scored really high on an IQ test. He did very well on his SATs. And he now rejects this way of thinking, or says he does, but he said at the time he turned it into a cult of self-worship
Mm.
because this was cold hard evidence that he was smarter than everyone else around him. And people would say to him, "Oh, Matt, you're so smart. If you just put an effort into it, if you tried a little harder, you could do so much." And he's like, "But why would I put an effort in when I get praise for doing nothing?"
Mm, crazy. This just shows how inane, just like utterly ridiculous it is too, that baseball story that these people blame feminism and blame women for their pain when it's patriarchy that's causing their pain, right? Like that like measuring stick that I'm not measuring up to the other men. I don't measure up as an athlete, right? That's not women's fault. That's patriarchy's fault that you are in terrible pain and that you're not respected for meeting those standards of masculinism. They're misattributing the problem.
That's the way I've always thought of it.
Yeah.
Like the nerds have gotten their revenge. The meek have inherited the earth. Like it is the top of our society is not gladiators or like physical strength. It's nerds like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, right? And
hmm
yet they're still mad about it.
hmm
They're still mad that they're not that archetype of masculinity.
hmm
Like it's just I'm like, you won.
Yeah.
Like you're good at computers, like be happy. But
Yeah.
they're not. They would rant that the incels in particular would rant that so there's alpha males and beta males, right? And they would say the women would pursue alpha F sex and
hmm
beta, right? Meaning that women would date all the sexy alpha males through their entire 20s. And then when they were becoming ugly and used up and no longer valuable to society, they'd find a nice little beta who'd been spending all his time working hard, building a career, saving money, and marry him, stick around for a couple of years, and then divorce him and take half his money. That's their
Perfect.
yeah,
Awesome.
that's the view of it. And it's like, I don't know. They like couldn't picture themselves not being um like they're not able to conceive of a masculinity where they get to be the good guys. Does
hmm
that make sense?
hmm
Like
hmm
their only idea of masculinity is like the I don't know fireman calendar or something.
Yeah.
Like they can't conceive of being like proud and strong and stable because they have a good job and have a good relationship and take care of their children. Like
hmm
they just can't see it that way.
hmm Which is why we so need, I mean, one of the biggest takeaways for me throughout this project that I've done in Breaking Down Patriarchy is what a need there is for men like that, men who are fully developed as human beings with all of the, positive traits that we consider masculine and feminine, that these men speak out more and that boys can see good examples of present dads, kind men who are also strong. Maybe they like to lift weights, but they also love to read to their kids at night, that they're not mutually exclusive. These
Yeah.
men, we need more of these men and for these men to be loud, and talk about the joys of doing all of these things and that it doesn't disempower or emasculate you to have, a rich emotional life, for example, and vulnerability, right? So anyway, but yes, it's patriarchy that's created this problem in the first place. It's
Well, did you
not
see the
feminism.
thing on Twitter where Vivek Ramaswamy said, as part of this debate over H-1B visas, that there was something wrong with American culture because it valued Zach Morris instead of Screech from Saved by the
Oh,
Bell? Did
I
you
did
see
not.
all of that?
No, I
Oh,
didn't
it's
see it.
really fascinating. It's a very
Wow.
long thread, but it's basically about how America doesn't encourage excellence and therefore has fewer like engineers and scientists because it values the jock over the nerd.
Hmm.
And Ramaswamy obviously is not alt right, but he has said some things that are sort
Yeah.
of in from the online right world, and it's like I'm just like, see that. I'm like, there it is again.
hmm
Like, there it is again. Like, you can graduate from high school, like, intellectually. Like, this doesn't have to follow you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. That insecurity. Oh man, that is fascinating. No, I hadn't heard that. Okay, another question. You've been mentioning Richard Spencer a few times, and Okay, when you're writing about Richard Spencer and the alt-right, you say, quote, whatever the alt-right wanted to do to Black people, immigrants, Jews, Muslims, gay people, race traitors, all that would have to wait till after the fascist revolution. But what they wanted to do to women, they could do right away. And they call it peaceful ethnic cleansing. Um, but that requires so the peaceful ethnic cleansing, so that bigger like racial agenda that required scale, but the woman question started at home. So that kind of blew my mind and was just really distressing to read. So let's get into this. What do they want to do with women, and how's that project going?
I mean, some of them would openly joke. I mean, like slaves. um, some of them, not all of them, would joke that way. But and then again, like as the alt-right later kind of fell apart, like that has dissipated a little bit. But yeah, they wanted women to not have choices about how to live their lives. They wanted doting, submissive women who did not have jobs. Um, it was like, so I was listening to a podcast. I can't remember what it was, but someone said like racism is a bigotry of separation, but misogyny is a bigotry of integration. Like you live with the person who feels this way about you.
Mm.
Um, and and so like they could treat the women in their lives horribly. I mean, one woman said she had run the women's section of a large uh, white nationalist fraternity. She said when she left, first, her boyfriend, they were like a power couple. He wanted her to publicly pretend to still be dating him because he wanted to project that image to other men
Oh my
that he
gosh.
was, squared away on top of his game. She claimed that he threatened to break her legs if she left, that he would do horrible things to her, that he could, marshal this army of trolls against her. Um, it's like if you mistreat a stranger on the street, whether it's for racism, homophobia, or anything, you could get punched in the face. But it's much easier over time to abuse the person you're in a romantic relationship with.
Hmm. It is. And we see that, I mean, because even domestic violence, how it affects every country, every nationality, every religion, every socioeconomic bracket. Like uh that abuse of women is just pervasive throughout all sectors of society to that point. So
I got the cell phone of that woman who
mm,
ran the women's part of it was called Identity Europa, and it had been not connected to the internet since she quit. And so I got the screen fixed. It had been all cracked, and I just started going through it. I'm going through all these different threads, and when the women are even in groups of just women, they're still publicly defending what these guys are doing, saying, well, oh, it's just a joke. I didn't get the jokes at first, but now I understand that they're just doing their memes. Um, like there was such an intense degree of like of rationalization and
mhm,
justification, their own mistreatment. And it
mhm.
was only one on one that they would begin to confess to each other. Like I had went on 3 dates with this man, and I am scared of him. He should not be around other women, you
Mm,
know. Like another one finally was like, I can no longer make propaganda encouraging women to join this movement because it hates them. And of course, there was the woman who participated in white Sharia. I mean, that chain of, I guess I had heard that it takes many, many tries for a woman in a domestic violence situation to leave her partner. But I never understood it from the inside that way. Even just interviewing someone face to face, they're going to be giving me a different sort of image. They're putting up a front, but this just these raw texts between saying this guy, she loved this guy, and then maybe he's not capable of love, and then he's like treating her horribly, spitting on her in front of other people, and then back again.
mhm,
Um, it, like you see the degree to which people will, over time, believe that they deserve their mistreatment, like believe that
Mhm.
they're stupid, believe that they deserve to be abused.
Mhm. Oh, it's awful. But you have mentioned also a couple of women who got out, right? Who got out of
Mhm.
it and are speaking out about it, and that's really inspiring. Do you have any stories that you could share about that?
Samantha Froelich, she's the woman who had the phone. For most people, it's not a big immediate epiphany that they're racist
Mm.
or that they're assholes. It's like there's like something that happens bad to them starts to be the beginning instigation, this like nagging feeling that things aren't right. And then they leave, and then over time, they're like, oh, yeah, the Holocaust probably really did happen.
Mm.
They just lose the beliefs that they'd adopted. Um, so Samantha was dating Elliot Klein, who was running Identity Europa, a big part of the Charlottesville organization, and they broke up. She was afraid of him, but she didn't want to be around him anymore, and she kind of fled. She told me she lived in a cabin in the woods for a while before moving in with some relatives. Um, and I, talked to this person for years now, and it has been a slow process in gradually letting go of those beliefs. And also, I felt like letting go of a lot of internalized misogyny,
Mhm.
just in the way she would speak to me. I mean, as a woman journalist, my perspective in interviewing these women is often like I get the projected misogyny, I get the projected self-hate, like it comes to me, and it's it can be really unsettling.
Mhm.
Yeah, so Samantha has been speaking out. Some have left quietly, um, and some have just gone quiet without saying explicitly that they're against this stuff, but
Mhm.
they're no longer active.
Yeah. Well, that's heartening to know that that happens too. And it strikes me too, you talked about how in domestic violence situations that it often takes like years sometimes and multiple attempts to get out. And that just means that maybe your body's safe, but the deprogramming of the mind can take your entire lifetime, honestly. Like that's just can be so hard to extract when it's become so internalized, of course, in your psyche, in your emotions, in your habits of thinking, right? And the way
Yeah,
you see the world, it just can be so hard to deconstruct inside. So yeah, but it can be done. It can be done.
yeah.
Well, as we're nearing the end of our discussion time, I want to shift to one last subject. I know you were in Portland and Seattle in the summer of 2020. You were kind of everywhere. It's amazing, Ellie, and all of these really important moments. Um, my sister lived in Portland at the time, and she said it was terrifying. And I know for a lot of people, what they saw that summer was footage of riots and street brawls. But I'm curious because it kind of depended where you got your news, what you were seeing. And that's been a theme like for the last few years too, is like Americans are getting vastly different pictures of what's going on. As someone who is there personally, what's your perspective on that summer of 2020 specifically and maybe in Portland?
Yeah. I mean, it was to with the two different kinds of news. Like, we'd be taking an Uber to a protest site where I knew that I would be seeing mostly kids, who had just come to that summer. And the woman who was driving the Uber was telling us all about how her husband was watching all these YouTube videos about Antifa training camps and how they were coming in bands to like cities to attack people.
Hmm.
And that just wasn't true. But I did find that so early in June, there was like very violent clashes between police and protesters. And many of the people who joined the protests had not been expecting that and were kind of traumatized by that. And that really bonded them together and not always in a healthy way, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Like they hadn't been anarchists or super leftists before then, but over time, this like groupthink took over to where they're like they really would kit out in full on like protective gear, bulletproof vests, the helmets, like reinforced gloves, And there were many people who didn't want to participate in acts of violence or direct protesting, and they would be medics.
Mm.
So that gave them some protection from police violence, but they still got to be there. And I felt like some were almost addicted to it. Now, that
Mm.
doesn't mean, I'm not saying that to disparage what they're protesting for, which when I was talking to them was largely police reform, but, and, systemic racism. But a real groupthink did take over. And there was also they had these like online networks where they'd be chatting with each other and they'd feel this immense trust in each other, but they didn't actually know each other. So anyone could make essentially a flyer for a poster. Like you put an image, you say the date and the time and, one of the little slogans, and it would get forwarded around like crazy. And then people would all show up and sometimes they'd be angry. They're like, who's leading this? And, it wasn't clear who actually organized it.
Hmm.
I was accused of collaborating with apparently some organizers that other organizers didn't like, just like out of nowhere on Twitter. I was like, no, I don't know them. There's like paranoia, um, or there was this group in Portland. Um, they had a very funny, catchy Twitter handle, and I don't remember what it was, and they were just tweeting constantly about it. And I'd ask people like, okay, is this group of kids, there's purportedly teenagers. I was like, are they legit? And people will be like, oh yeah, they're really legit. They're really legit. I'm like, have you ever met them? And they're like, no.
Hmm.
I'm like, do you know anyone who has? No. Do you know what they look like? No. I have no idea. Like they could have been
They're
anywhere.
ghosts. Huh.
Yeah. Likewise, like there was a woman involved in the online protesting around the Chaz in Seattle, the sort of Capitol Hill autonomous zone. It was like it started as a meme and then it became a real thing, this like small area where cops weren't in. And at first it was like a fun little party, but there was constant rumors that Proud Boys were coming. So some anti-fascists started securing the perimeter, open carrying assault rifles, like AR-15s and stuff.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it created this like paranoia and like it just anyway, like over time there was a shooting near there. Over time, it stopped being a fun party and the violence escalated until two kids stole a car and were driving into the area and someone allegedly mistook them for right wingers and shot them and killed them or killed one of them. And they were actually just unarmed Black teenagers. So it took a month to replicate the thing they were protesting. I did go back there. I mean, there are people who are sort of grappling with that reality. But anyway, it's just a lesson in like it, it, the bad things that social media can do. It's
Mhm.
not limited to the right wing. And the right wing gets a lot more of the focus, but it is completely value neutral and moral neutral. And any group of activists are vulnerable to this kind of groupthink and infiltration by bad actors
Hmm.
and ghosts
Mhm.
and people you have no idea if they're real or not.
Mhm. Yeah. That's really important. I'm really glad you mentioned that. I wonder if maybe the last question I'd like to ask you, we're ending all of our episodes this season with action items and specific things that people can do to deconstruct patriarchy and racism and these oppressive systems in our maybe in our own communities, starting with where we are, and things that people can really do based on your journalism and the things that you've been studying and in writing this book. What would you say are some action items that you'd like to leave with listeners?
Run for school board. Because
Mm.
having grown up in again very evangelical Tennessee, that's where it all began. That's where the evangelical groups started building their base of power politically. Um, Even a white nationalist had said to me that the misogyny of the alt right was unfortunate because women were often better at getting what white nationalists wanted. Now he was talking favorably about segregation, anti-busing policies, etc. But I think the lesson is an interesting one, which is that when women are working on behalf of their children, they are very highly motivated to take concrete action to do good things.
Hmm.
Um, I definitely would say do not cut off the people in your family who are believing things that you think are extreme or off the deep end, because it doesn't work. Like, it doesn't change their mind. You have to engage with them in a way that respects their intelligence. Even if you think they're believing something really, really stupid, it just does not work to say that's stupid. It just doesn't. So you have to be willing to engage in long, slow conversations. Like, in talking to extremists, like, often was able to kind of crack some of their ideas um, after hours and hours of conversations. But, I can't do that at scale.
Hmm.
People are
Hmm.
going to have to take care of their own families. Um, yeah, those are two of the big ones.
I love that you said both of those. Those are, I mean, school board, that just means like it really truly in your community. And that small feels small, but it is. It's like if you scale it, that grassroots impact can be huge. And then likewise, the other one too, I'm so interested to hear you say that because as you know, in this moment, especially right now, there's a lot of debate about that, about, whether it's better to, in the name of accountability, cut people off, kind of draw a really hard line. I will not tolerate this in my life versus being willing to keep engaging in hopes that there will be, a change of hearts and minds. And I tend to agree with you, Ellie, and also based on my own experience, as I said, like having grown up in an ideology where I was taught and I absorbed messages that then later I realized, like, oh no, I don't believe that anymore. But I was able to make changes in my own life, in my own mind and heart, because people were patient with me and people didn't give up on me and people didn't write me off. And I do know that, like, anytime someone, for example, I come from the Mormon tradition, and when I would encounter people who would make me feel like they thought I was stupid or they thought I
Mhm.
was a bigot, all it would make me want to do is just dig my heels in harder and defend, right? And so having been on the other side, it does make me think actually I believe we have to play the long game and see the humanity in people, if only because strategically that's what I have seen work. So,
I mean, it's easier said, like, even for me, this is difficult. Like, I
mhm,
can sit and listen to a stranger say all kinds of stuff to me for hours. Like, this is
mm,
like the skill I bring to my work.
mm,
In real life, it is so much harder for me to hear it from someone close to me, because it's
mhm,
like, it makes it so much more real. It's like, it's gotten close to me. I have a hard time controlling my emotions and not just getting angry. I was hanging out with people over the holidays who were voicing some anti-vax stuff, and I like felt myself like wanting to do just a big confrontation that would feel good in the moment. But it doesn't work.
mhm.
I say, like, you can try doing charts and statistics and stuff, but in the digital age, like, anyone can have access to that, and they'll be able to find something to prove their side.
Yep.
They can chart by chart with you. I found that arguing more, like, in terms of logic, like common sense, was a lot. I got a lot further.
Okay, that's good. I was going to ask you what you did do actually, and what are some of your tactics and strategies in those conversations to that you've seen crack people open. So you're saying like, yeah, not going to data because anyone can find data that supports their opinion,
Yeah.
but
I mean, I can give a few examples. They're not like, grand slams or something of someone suddenly becoming reasonable, but like with one white nationalist who's like saying all this misogynist shit to me about how I was like bad and a woman,
wow.
etc. Going on and on about my voice, that I was like doing a voice, and I was like, wait, no, I am a woman. I have a
Hmm.
higher voice than you. I have a woman's voice. Like, it is higher. That's just how it is. And that was like one moment where he was like, oh yeah, okay, like, I guess, yeah, that's true. That's true.
Wow. Wow.
Um, there was like another time. I apologize. This like example is, but like they were talking about, supposedly white people evolving to be smarter. They believe it's because we had winter in Europe
Mm.
and they get to plan for the winter.
Oh, I've heard
Um,
this. They had to work harder and be more innovative because then,
yeah,
yeah, I've heard this as a,
so
yeah,
they codification, long-term planning, all of that stuff. I'm like,
yep.
okay, well, language was invented in like what's now Iraq. It's
Mm-hmm.
pretty hot there, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like they like think of themselves as so scientific. I'm like,
Mm,
Africa is an enormous country, like, or sorry, an enormous continent. Like, why would every single person who was born there or had origins there be the same? Like, it doesn't make sense. It wouldn't doesn't work that way for animals. Like, why would that be for people? Like, um, it's just things like that.
oh,
Like,
even engaging in a conversation like that, I can just feel my blood
ah,
pressure rising. And you just want to be like, you're a racist asshole. And you want to
yeah,
just, no, it's good actually that you're describing this because I'm feeling so furious hearing it and thinking of engaging with a person who has those beliefs is actually really hard. So, as much as I'm like, yeah, engage with them, have an open heart, and like that's the way you'll reach them. That's rough, actually. If they're saying stuff that is that, um,
oh,
oh,
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
so bad.
They
Huh.
say really like it's been anti-Semitism that has been one of the hardest ones to
Mm,
I don't think I've ever actually made much headway on that
hmm
with the people that die hard. I mean, I'll just
hmm
feel it. Well, they I mean, I'm just like, have you ever met any Jews? They're like, no. I'm like, okay, well, like it's just not like what you think it's like. It's just not that big a deal. I don't know how else to say it to you.
hmm Yeah.
It's but yeah, just like, you know, it's difficult because, for some of them, if, like, say, for example, they say all these terrible things about women being bad at math. Well, I'll just use that for example. And I would be talking to this white nationalist, and I would be like, well, I'm really good at math. Like, I've actually always been good at math, spatial reasoning skills. I have an amazing throwing arm. Like,
hmm
and some will kind of listen, but he would be like, how can you not understand the difference between group averages and individual cases?
hmm
Um, yeah, it's like, well, actually, he's a really interesting. So that's Chris Cantwell. He was later known as the Crying Nazi. So he went to jail for several years over an extortion case. Um, the details are kind of darkly amusing, but I won't get into it. But he was in a place where the media he consumed and the about amount he was able to talk to the rest of the world was very tightly controlled.
Mm.
And when he got out, he went on this podcast and he said, once you're in there, you can't consume racist propaganda every single day. And you start to realize like how limited your worldview is and that there's other stuff going on. And I talked to
Mm.
him about it, and he's like, yeah, I just started to realize that just only like race being the only thing like that's boring. And it's just the same
Wow.
stuff over and over again.
Hmm. Wow, that's really interesting. Well, I mean, I think as I'm hearing you talk, it's really striking me how important it is sometimes, even if you're not gonna ever change the person's heart and mind, and they don't have the experience of going to jail, so they they have their media restricted, right? That we don't have control ultimately over whether someone changes, but we do have control over what we want to be, who we want to be in life, and just maintaining our own integrity and saying that's not true, like or phrasing it in a way that might have the highest chance of positive impact and saying like, oh, you might want to read this book, you might want to read, or take a look at this YouTube video or this podcast. It has a different um point of view, but saying something, but then sometimes not getting sucked into long pointless conversations that drain our energy and actually aren't going to make any difference. I don't know. That's just maybe something that we can feel out as we go. It'll be different for different people, but wow, good for you for fighting the good fight, Ellie, and having conversations with in really, really difficult and sometimes dangerous circumstances. I just admire your work so, so much and have learned so much from even just from this conversation. So I don't want to cut you off. Sorry, offline. Is there anything else that you wanted to say? I want to make sure I'm not bulldozing you at the end.
No, no, no.
Okay.
This has been really, really great.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. This has been just awesome. Thank you, Ellie.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Okay, one last thing is I'll have you, I'd love to have you talk about again, repeat the title of your book and where people can find you on social media. So let me ask that and we'll splice it back in.
Wait,
Um,
hold on.
or no, is that good or no?
Yeah, no, it's just the subtitle of my book is so long.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I can read it because I have it written down. How about that?
Yeah.
That's funny. Okay, I'll do that. Um, well, again, Elle Reeve, thank you so much for being here. I so enjoyed this conversation and admire your work tremendously. And for listeners, again, Ellie's book is Black Pill: How I Witnessed the Darkest Corners of the Internet Come to Life, Poison Society, and Capture American Politics. So thank you for this book. And really quick, can you just tell us where people can find your work, maybe on social media or other places?
Sure. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky. If you just search ELLEREEVE, I'm the one that pops up. And I'm on CNN.
Awesome. Thank you so much again.
Thanks for having me.